If this hostage deal does happen, what do you see happening next?
I think that the Americans, the Chinese, the Gulf states are going to take a few days of no hostilities, or hopefully no hostilities, and use every point of leverage they have to try to extend it into diplomacy that could continue a reduction of fighting, because people are concerned about the escalation. But I want to be very clear that Netanyahu's statement does not just speak for him. It's the entire war cabinet, pretty much the whole political spectrum in Israel wants to destroy Hamas. And Hamas is not destroyed at this point, neither in Gaza City nor in the south of Gaza, where, of course, civilians have recently been evacuated too. And so I think if you're a betting person, you don't believe, despite the fact that this is welcome news and we're very, very happy if we can get any of these hostages back to their families, no one should really believe that this is the beginning of the end of the war. We're not close to that right now.
Well, that answers my question next for you, Ian. Israel, we understand, would release 3 Palestinian prisoners for each Israeli hostage, and it could come reportedly in a couple of phases. We've been talking largely about what a first phase would look like in a potential 4 to 5 day ceasefire, if I should, for lack of a better phrase. But there was also talk of a second phase that could involve an additional release of Israeli hostages in exchange for a longer ceasefire. It doesn't sound like you see that happening.
Oh, no, it could actually have. First of all, it's not a ceasefire. It's a humanitarian pause. It's a stupid term of art, but it is precisely because both sides are expecting that while you are doing this to protect civilians, or at least try to minimize the harm, the extraordinary harm that civilians have had, that everybody knows you're going back to fighting. And that is not just what the Israelis are saying, that's what the Americans are saying. So the Americans do not support a ceasefire at this point. A lot of other countries do. The French are kind of in an in-between position. The Canadians are out saying they want to get to a ceasefire, the Australians, and certainly every country in the region. But the United States does not. So, yeah, you can get more hostages returned, and maybe you can go through that 2, 3, 4 times over the coming months. But once again, this war, I mean, Israel does not intend to stop until they feel like Hamas has been destroyed. Now, the problem here is that while Israel and their military forces believe that they are engaging in, I mean, they've got tactical wins on the ground, they're gaining territory, you know, they're blowing up the tunnels, they're taking out military capabilities of Hamas, but they're losing the information war globally. There are, you know, the United States and Biden increasingly isolated on the world stage, including among Biden's own Democratic supporters in the United States, for being so full-throated in their support of Israel. And Israel has to think not just about what they're doing in Gaza, but also about the world they're going to exist in after the fighting stops. And right now, that second world looks pretty problematic for them.
Well, when you talk about President Biden's full-throttled support for Israel, do you see at any point that he will start to ratchet that back a bit?
So privately, the Biden administration has been saying, you know, if you keep this going for a few more weeks, the U.S. might not be able to continue to provide the same level of military support that they have. There might have to be a pause. I mean, you know, the U.S. provides over $3 billion of military support to Israel, more than for any other country in the Middle East. But Biden is not providing support to Israel because he thinks it's politically popular or expedient. This has been a long-held position that he believes in. He believes in as much as he believes in democracies versus autocracies, which he says all the time. And he and Secretary of State Blinken have been up there publicly saying, as long as the United States is standing, you know, Israel has a stalwart friend. I don't see them backing away from that. I see some private pressure. I'd have a really hard time imagining that Biden's suddenly going to say, nope, we need a ceasefire now. You haven't removed Hamas, but we need a ceasefire. I can't see Biden saying that Israel needs to be willing to live next to a territory that's run by a terrorist organization. They're just not going to do it.
Well, what does that mean then, though, for the debate here in Washington over potentially billions in funding for Israel? You know, it's bogged down in process here, and we don't have to debate that now. But if there's an impression that the U.S. might be pulling back with full-throated military support, what does that mean about the money?
Again, I don't think that there is a reality that Biden is going to change his public position. And the money for Israel going forward, I do think that there is informal pressure, but I also think that the baseline of American support, Republicans are completely behind it. Democrats, a majority of Democrats are uncomfortable. But if there were a vote taken in the House or Senate, you'd still get a strong majority supporting Israel. So at the end of the day, I think that Netanyahu and Benny Gantz and the war cabinet in Israel feel like they may be unpopular all over the world, but ultimately they can do what they want and the United States will back them up. That's a bet they are making. And for now, I think that's a reasonable bet. There's a bigger question of whether the events of the last 6 weeks after October 7th, whether Israel has lost permanently some of the support they have from the United States. And here, I feel they might have. I mean, 5-10 years ago, you couldn't raise public questions about Israel the way that you can now. I mean, the establishment media would not have accepted that. Professors would have gotten in trouble for really going after U.S. support on Israel. That's now becoming a mainstream and acceptable position, especially among young people in the United States. And I do worry, in the same way that the Americans were trying to pivot away from the Middle East for a decade or more, that America's long-term commitment to Israel may now be open to question in a way that really none of us growing up over the past decades would have considered possible.